There is a place in Västergötland called Varnhem. If you stand there today, you'll see the ruins of a medieval abbey, stone walls, grass growing between the foundations, the kind of quiet that settles over places where people prayed for centuries. But if you look closer, if you walk past the abbey, toward the edge of the grounds, you'll find something older. Beneath a modern wooden shelter protected from sun and rain, there is a crypt, a small stone chamber built in the late 10th century. It is, as far as archaeologists can tell, one of the oldest Christian churches in Sweden. And beside it, there is a grave, the grave of a woman named Katta. Katta lived in the early 11th century. She was wealthy, she was powerful, she owned the land where the church was built, and when she died, someone who loved her placed a limestone slab over her grave, carved in runes, and a cross, and the inscription reads, Kjetil made this stone after Katta, his wife, sister of Torbjörn, a husband honoring his wife, a woman buried with her feet to the east, facing the resurrection, a cross carved into stone, marking her as Christian. But here's what catches me. Just beyond the cemetery wall, just outside the stone enclosure that separates the Christian dead from the world, there are burial mounds, older, pre-Christian, mounds where Katta's ancestors would have been buried with their swords and with their horses and with everything they needed for whatever came next. The old way and the new way within sight of each other, the same landscape holding both. In episode 6, we met the old gods, Ymir, Yggdrasil, the world built from a giant's body. In episode 8, we followed Swedish Vikings east, serving Christian emperors in Constantinople, watching the wealth of Christendom accumulate. Now in episode 9, we watch those two worlds meet. But the story I've been telling, the story of slow seepage, of gradual conversion, is only half the story. Because the coming of Christianity was not always peaceful. Not everyone wanted the new God, and some people, some of them famous, some of them forgotten, stood against it, sometimes violently, sometimes with everything they had. And the religion that arrived was not just a faith, it was a system, a structure, a way of organizing people, controlling resources, and concentrating power. This is the story of the new God and the slow death of the old ones, and the people who fought to keep them alive, and the way that power uses belief then and now. Before we talk about how Christianity came to Sweden, we need to remember what it replaced. The old gods were not distant. They lived in the landscape. Thor's hammer protected the farm, Freyr blessed the harvest, Odin watched from the branches of Yggdrasil, that great ash tree that held the cosmos together, and the dead were not gone. They were present, buried in mounds that rose from the earth like permanent reminders that those who came before were still watching. But there's something important about the old religion. It didn't have priests, not in the way Christianity had priests. It didn't have a hierarchy, it didn't have a central authority. There was no Vatican, no pope, no bishops telling people what to believe or how to practice. The old religion was local. It was practiced at home, at the farm, at the sacred grove down the road. It was embedded in the rhythms of the seasons, the cycles of planting and harvest, the rituals of birth and death. It didn't require you to go to a special building on a special day. It didn't demand that you give a portion of your wealth to a distant institution. It didn't tell you that your ancestors were wrong and you needed to change everything you believed. The old gods didn't ask for power, they asked for respect. They lived in the world, not above it. And the people who honored them did so because it made sense, because the world made sense that way. Then came the new God, and with him came a new kind of power. If you visit Gamla Uppsala today, north of the modern Uppsala, you'll see three great mounds rising from the sky. They are enormous. The largest is nearly 10 meters high. They were built in the 5th and 6th centuries, long before the Viking Age, long before Christianity arrived. but they remained sacred. The old kings were buried there. The thing, the assembly, met there. And according to Adam of Bremen, a Christian chronicle writing in 1070, there was also a temple. Adam's description is vivid. He writes that the temple was adorned with gold, surrounded by a grove so sacred that each singular tree is considered to be divine. Inside, statues of three gods sat on a triple throne. Thor, the mightiest, sat in the center with a mace like Jupiter. Odin, whom Adam called Woden, sat beside him, armored like Mars, and Freyr, the god of fertility, sat on the other side, depicted with an immense erect penis. Every 9 years, Adam wrote, there was a great festival. 9 males of every living creature were sacrificed. Their corpses hung in the grove. One Christian said Adam told him that he had seen 72 cadavers hanging there. That is a horrifying picture, and for centuries, historians took it at face value. Here was proof. The old religion was bloody, primitive, waiting to be replaced by something better. But the ground tells a different story. Archaeologists have been excavating Gamla Uppsala for generations. They have found the mounds, they have found the royal halls, they have found evidence of feasting, of power, of a center that controlled much of central Sweden. But they have not found the temple. Not a single structure that matches Adam's description. No golden chain, no triple throne, no grove of hanging corpses. What they have found are halls, great wooden buildings where chieftains feasted, where decisions were made, where power was displayed, and in those halls there are traces of ritual, objects associated with the gods, offerings placed in the post holes, evidence of feasting that may have had religious significance. The scholar Adam of Bremen, writing from Germany, had never been to Uppsala. He was describing what he had heard, filtered through his own assumptions and his desire to portray the heathens as barbaric. The reality, as far as we can tell, was different. The old religion did not have temples in the way Christianity had churches. It had sacred places, groves, springs, mountains, and halls. The gods were honored in the same spaces where people gathered to eat, to drink, to make decisions, to bury their dead. When Adam wrote about a temple, he was imposing his own framework on a world that didn't share it. This matters because the conversion of Sweden was not a simple story of one true religion replacing a false one. It was a slow, messy, deeply human process in which old ways of understanding the world were gradually, incompletely, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes violently, replaced by new ones. And the new ones came with a structure, a hierarchy, a system of power. When Christianity arrived in Scandinavia, it didn't arrive alone. It arrived with bishops, with churches, with taxes, with a claim not just on belief, but on loyalty. In the old religion, power was local. A chieftain might have influence over his own people, but he didn't claim authority over their souls. He didn't demand that they give a tenth of their wealth to a central institution. He didn't tell them that their ancestors were burning in a place called hell unless they paid for a mass to be said. Christianity brought all of that. The church was not just faith, it was a corporation, an institution, a structure designed to extract resources, money, land, labor from the people who lived under its authority. In exchange, it offered something the old religion never promised: salvation. But salvation came with a price. Tithe, the tenth. 10% of everything you produced, everything you earned, everything you owed was supposed to go to the church, not to your local community, not to your family, to a distant institution with a bishop at its head and a pope at its center. Historians estimate that by the high Middle Ages, the church controlled as much as 20 to 30% of the land in some parts of Europe. In Sweden, the church became the largest landowner in the country. The wealth that had once been distributed through feasts, through gift giving, through the bonds of kinship and loyalty, was now flowing into the coffers of an institution. And the people who controlled that institution, the bishops, the archbishops, the pope, held power that no Viking chieftain could have imagined. But the church didn't just want wealth. It wanted control over belief, control over practice, control over the stories people told about the world. The old religion had been flexible. You could honor Thor in one village and Freyr in another. You could leave offerings at a sacred spring without anyone telling you it was wrong. You could bury your ancestors in mounds and believe they were watching over you, and no one would call you a heretic. Christianity demanded uniformity. There was one God, one truth, one way to be saved, and if you did not accept that truth, if you kept offerings at the springs and kept telling stories to your children, you were not just wrong, you were dangerous. You were a threat to the social order. You were a pagan, a heretic, someone who needed to be corrected by persuasion, by law, or by force. This is the part of the conversion story that we don't like to talk about. The part where the new religion used its power to suppress the old, where kings and bishops worked together to make the old ways illegal, where the people who held on to their ancestors' beliefs were marginalized, punished, sometimes killed. The conversion of Sweden was not just a spiritual transformation, it was a power grab. And the people who saw it for what it was, they fought back. In the center of Linköping on Stora Torget, there is a fountain. If you've been to Linköping, you have seen it. I've seen it. I've walked past it countless times. It was sculpted by Carl Milles, one of Sweden's most famous artists, and it was unveiled in 1927. The fountain depicts a man on horseback. He is leaning forward, his face anguished, searching. The horse's legs are tangled, caught in the water, slipping on stones. The man's name is Folke Filbyter. Folke Filbyter is a legend. He is said to be the ancestor of the House of Bjärbo, the dynasty that would produce Birger Jarl, the man often called the founder of Sweden. According to tradition, he lived in the 11th century at the very moment when Christianity was spreading across Scandinavia. His name Filbyter means foal biter. It's a nickname, likely earned because he was said to castrate horses with his teeth, a brutal, visceral image for a man who lived on the edge of the old world. But Folke Filbyter was not just a warrior. He was something more complicated. In the early 20th century, Swedish writer Verner von Hedenstam wrote a novel called Folkungträdet, the Folkunga Tree, in which Folke is the center figure. Hedenstam's Folke is a man of contradictions. He spent his life as a Viking, raiding and trading, accumulating wealth and violence. He returns to Sweden and settles on an estate, where he lives in what Hedenstam describes as the same dirty poverty as their thralls. A wealthy man who refuses to adopt the trappings of the New World. He has 3 children. 2 sons go east into Russia, into the rivers and the silver trade. The 3rd son kidnaps a woman and brings her home. She dies in childbirth, leaving a grandson, Folke's heir. And then something happens that breaks him. His remaining son, the one who stayed, converts to Christianity. And when he converts, he gives his young son to a traveling monk. The monk takes the child, Folke's grandson, his heir, his blood, is carried away into the world of the new faith. Folke cannot accept this. He mounts his horse and rides. He searches. He crosses rivers, fords, and streams. He will not stop until he finds the child and brings him back to the old world, the old ways. Heidenstam describes Folke as a man who does not hesitate to destroy both the idols of the old faith and those of the new faith. He believes in nothing except blood, except family, except the continuity of his line. And when Christianity threatens to take that from him, he fights. The statue in Linköping captures the moment when Folke's horse slips on a wet stone in a stream. The horse twists, losing its balance. The rider leans forward, searching and desperate. It is a moment of crisis, a moment when the old world is literally losing its footing, slipping into something new, and the man at the center of it is desperately trying to hold on. Folke Filbyter may not have been a real person. There is no contemporary historical evidence for him. His name first appears in a source from 1616, and even that source draws on the 15th century manuscript. He is a legend, a myth, a story told to explain where the great families of Sweden came from. But the legends are not just lies, they are truths told in a different language. Folke Filbyter is the story of someone who stood against Christianity, not because he loved the old gods. Heidenstam's Folke destroys idols of both faiths because he loved something else. He loved his family, his lineage, his grandson, and the new faith, with its monks and its churches and its claims on children, was taking that from him. He rode out to get it back, and he failed. The statue shows him at the moment of failure, the horse slipping, the water rising, the grandson gone. He is caught between worlds, belonging to neither, and he is losing. Folke Filbyter is not the only story of resistance. There were real people who fought the coming of the new God. There were rebellions. There were kings deposed for refusing to uphold the old customs. There were people who, generation after generation, buried their dead in mounds while the churches rose around them. One of them was King Blot-Sweyn. He ruled Sweden in the late 11th century. His name, Blot-Sweyn, means Sweyn the sacrificer. He was a king who came to power because his predecessor, King Inge the Elder, had refused to perform the traditional sacrifices at Uppsala. Inge was driven out. Blot-Sweyn took the throne and restored the old ways. Inge eventually returned, killed Blot-Sweyn, and destroyed the temple or whatever was there once and for all. But the memory of Blot-Sweyn, a king who chose the old gods over the new, who was willing to fight and die for them, survived. And then there were people whose names we don't know, the ones who left offerings at sacred springs long after the priests said they shouldn't, the ones who told the old stories to their children, even as those children were being baptized, the ones who carved Thor's hammer on the runestones and carved a cross on the other side, because they weren't ready to let go of either world. They lost in the end, the churches won, but the old gods faded into folklore, into stories, into the names of days of the week, but they didn't disappear without a fight. There is a runestone in Upland U1011, if you want the catalog number, that reads Sigfast and Arnfast had the stone raised in memory of Bjorn, their father. May God and God's mother help his spirit and soul. They built a bridge for his sake. A bridge built for the love of God, built so that people could cross safely, could travel, could trade, could live their lives, and a prayer carved in stone. May God and God's mother help his spirit and soul. This is the language of the new faith, carved in the old script. The runes are Norse, the words are Norse, but the prayer is Christian. The hope is Christian. The act of bridge building, or the making of the world safer, or creating a memorial that also serves the living, is presented as Christian duty. But here's what I keep thinking about. Who paid for those bridges? Who built them? And what did they get in return? The church taught that good works, the building of bridges, donating land, giving money, could shorten your time in purgatory, could save your soul, could protect your dead. It was a system. You give, and the church prays for you. You pay, and your ancestors are released from suffering. Your wealth, transferred to the institution, becomes your salvation. It's not that the old religion didn't have its own costs. There were sacrifices, there were feasts, there were obligations to chieftains and kings, but those costs were local. They stayed in the community. A feast fed your neighbors, a sacrifice honored the gods who protected your land. The wealth you spent stayed within the circle of people you knew, people who would help you when you needed it. The church took your wealth and sent it upward to the bishop, to the pope, to Rome. You would never see it again. In return, you got a promise you couldn't verify, a promise about a world you couldn't see. This is the system that replaced the old ways, a system that demanded your wealth, your obedience, your belief, and offered you something you could not hold in your hands, something you had to trust. And the people who built the bridges, who gave the land, who paid the tithe, they were buying something, not just salvation, security, status, a place in a new order. The church had power now, and the only way to be safe in the new world was to be on the church's side. The Venya runestone, which we mentioned in the last episode, was raised by a woman named Thorgethur. Her name means Thor's protection. It's a pagan name, a name that invokes the old god, the god of thunder, the protector of farms and families. But the stone bears a cross, Thorjagur, Thor's protection, raised a Christian monument. Did she convert? Or did her family convert after her death? We don't know, but the stone itself, with the pagan name and its Christian cross, is a record of transition, a family that carried the old gods in their names, but chose the new god for their memorials. But was it a choice when the alternative was being outside the system? When the alternative was being labeled a pagan, a heretic, someone who refused to accept the truth that everyone else was being told to accept? That's the thing about power. It doesn't always need to force you, it just needs to make the alternative unappealing, uncomfortable, or dangerous. We started this episode with Adam of Bremen's description of the temple at Uppsala, the golden chain, the triple throne, the 72 corpses hanging in the grove. We know now that the temple, as Adam described it, probably didn't exist. The archaeological evidence points to halls, not a dedicated temple building. The rituals were tied to the royal estate, to the feasting and decision making of the elite, not to a separate religious structure. But here's the thing, Adam's description didn't come from nowhere. There was something at Uppsala, something that mattered, something that people remembered, even if they remembered it imperfectly. Three great mounds still stand. The royal halls were there, the thing met there, the midwinter sacrifices, the Blot, were held there, attended by people from across the country, and the old gods were honored there, perhaps until the very end. The Swedish king Olaf Hutkonung was baptized around the year 1000. He is often called the first Christian king of Sweden, but his kingdom was not yet Christian. His people still made offerings at Uppsala. His descendants for generations would face rebellions from those who wanted the old ways preserved. One of them, King the Elder, was deposed in 1080 for refusing to perform sacrifices at Uppsala. He was replaced by his brother-in-law, who agreed to uphold the old customs. Inga eventually returned, killed his rival, and destroyed the temple or whatever was there once and for all. The temple that wasn't a temple was destroyed. The old gods were officially abandoned. But even then, the conversion was not complete. Pagan burial practices continued for generations afterwards. People who called themselves Christians still left offerings at sacred springs. The old stories were told, retold, written down by Christians who preserved them even as they rejected them. This is the part of the story I keep thinking about. The people who lived through the conversion didn't experience it as a single event. They experienced it as a slow drift, a gradual shift in what was normal, what was acceptable, and what was believed. One generation buried their dead with swords and horses. The next generation buried them with their feet facing to the east. One generation told stories about Thor and Odin. The next generation told the same stories but called them myths, legends, something their ancestors believed. But the drift was not natural. It was directed, it was managed, it was enforced by kings who saw the church as a source of power, by bishops who saw the old ways as a threat, by an institution that could not tolerate competition. The old gods did not die. They were killed slowly over centuries by laws that made their worship illegal, by kings who burned their temple, by an institution that claimed a monopoly on truth. They did not go quietly. There were men like Blot-Sweyn who kept them alive by fighting. There were women like Thorgother who carried the old names into the new world. There were legends like Folke Filbyter who rode out in search of a grandson stolen by monks, who slipped on the stones and lost his footing and fell between worlds. And eventually, they were gone. Not all at once, not dramatically, just gone. Remember the story of Folke Filbyter from earlier? The man on horseback searching for his grandson? That story, whether it's history or legend, hasn't stayed in the past. But here's what I think about standing there by the fountain. Folke Filbyter is a story about resistance, about a man who saw the new religion taking something from him, his grandson, his lineage, his world, and fought back. Heidenstein's Folke is not just a man who lost his grandson. He is a symbol of resistance to a foreign influence, a symbol of something authentic, something Swedish, something that existed before the church came and took it away. And that's the thing about stories. They get used, they get repurposed, they get turned into tools for whatever cause needs them. In Heidenstam's time, Sweden was changing. Industrialization was transforming the landscape. Socialism was challenging the old order. The church, once the dominant institution, was losing its grip. People were looking for something else to believe in, and Heidenstam offered them a story of a pagan past, a story of resistance, a story of a man who would not bow to the new God. Today, those same stories are being used in other ways. Across Europe, nationalist movements are reaching back into the pagan past, finding symbols and myths to rally around. Thor's hammer, once a symbol of protection, has now been co opted by white supremacists. The old gods, once the center of a local, decentralized faith, have now become emblems of an imagined, pure European identity. It's the same pattern. Power reaches into the past and pulls out what it needs. Stories are repurposed, symbols are claimed. The complexity of history, the messiness, the humanity, the contradictions is smoothed away, replaced by story that serves the present. The church did it in the 11th century. It took the old stories and rewrote them. It took the old gods and turned them into demons. It took the sacred places and built churches on top of them. It claimed the past for its own purposes, making it in its own image. And now, 1,000 years later, people are doing the same thing, reaching back into the past, claiming the old gods, using them for their own purposes. Folke Filbyter sits on his horse in Storyatorget, slipping on the stones, searching for his grandson. He is a legend, he is a myth, he is a story that has been told and retold, shaped and reshaped, used and reused. He is not real. He was never real, but the story of him is real. The longing he represents is real. The desire to hold on to something, something older, something authentic, something that belongs to you, that is real. And that's what the church understood 1,000 years ago. If you control the stories, you control the people. If you control the past, you control the future. The church controlled the stories for 1,000 years. It told people that the old gods were demons, that the old ways were sinful, that the only path to salvation was through the institution, through the priest, through the tithe, through the Pope in Rome. And now, in our time, the church is no longer the dominant storyteller. Other forces have taken its place, but the pattern is still the same. Stories are used, power is exercised, and the past is claimed. I haven't been to Varnhem, not yet, but it's on the list. I'll stand in the shelter that protects Cata's church, with its glass floor looking down on the crypt and the limestone coffin and the runestone carved with her name. I'll look north toward the women's side of the cemetery where Cata was buried. I'll look south toward the men's side where her husband's chattel might lie. I'll look east toward the altar that no longer stands, toward the resurrection that Katya's family believed in. And then I'll walk outside the cemetery wall. I'll walk toward the burial mounds. I'll stand where Kata's ancestors were buried, with their swords, with their horses, and everything they needed for whatever came next. The same landscape, the same soil, the same view of the sky. The people who built the mounds and the people who built the church were the same people, the same families, the same community. They just changed their minds slowly over generations in ways that felt natural, inevitable, and maybe even necessary. But not everyone changed their minds. Some held on, some fought, some lost. And the system that replaced their world, the church, the institution, the structure of power is still here, changed perhaps, weakened perhaps, but still here, still claiming authority, still telling stories, still reaching into the past and reshaping it for its own purposes. Every time I go to Storatoriet in Linköping and wait for the bus, I see the fountain. I see Folke Filbyter leaning forward on his horse, searching, slipping, caught between worlds, and I think about what it meant to be him, to watch the world change around you, to see your grandson carried away by monks, to mount your horse and ride after him, knowing you might not catch him, knowing the world you're fighting for is already gone. And I'll think about the stories we tell ourselves, about the past, about who we are, about what we believe, and I'll wonder, whose interests do these stories serve? Who benefits from the way we remember? In episode 6, we met the old gods, Ymir and Yggdrasil, the world built from a giant's body. In episode 8, we followed Swedish Vikings east, serving Christian emperors in Constantinople, watching the wealth of Christendom accumulate. Now, in episode 9, we've watched those two worlds meet, not always peaceful, not always willingly, sometimes in graves, sometimes on runestones, sometimes in the desperate ride of a man who lost his grandson and could not get him back. And we've seen how the new religion used its power, how it built a system, how it extracted wealth, how it claimed authority over belief, and how that system, that pattern of power, echoes still. Cata chose the cross, or her husband chose it for her, or her children, or her grandchildren. We don't know. But we know she was buried with her feet to the east, facing the resurrection. We know a runestone was carved with her name and a cross. We know that beyond the cemetery wall, the mounds of her ancestors still stand. And we know somewhere in Linköping, a man on a horse is still searching. These people lived at the intersection. And that intersection is where we find ourselves too, somewhere between the old and the new, between what we were given and what we choose, between the stories our ancestors told and the stories we tell ourselves, and between the stories that are told to us by people who want our loyalty, our wealth, or our belief. The old gods are gone, or they're not. They survive in the names of the days: Wednesday for Odin, Thursday for Thor, and Friday for Freyr. They survive in the stories we still tell, the myths we still read, the runestones we still visit. They survive in the landscape, in the mounds, in the places where people once left offerings and now leave flowers. They survive in a fountain in Linköping where a man on a horse searches for something he will never find. The new god arrived, but the old ones never really left. They just changed, came something else, found a different place in the world. And the system that replaced them changed too, became something else. But the pattern, The pattern of power using belief, of institutions claiming authority, of stories being shaped to serve the powerful, that pattern is still here. That's the story of conversion in Sweden. Not a victory, not a defeat, a layering, the old under the new, the mounds beside the churches, the runestones with crosses and the runestones with Thor's hammers, sometimes on the same stone, carved by people who wanted to hold onto both worlds as long as they could. And sometimes the people who couldn't hold on, the ones who fought and lost, the ones who slipped on the stones and fell between worlds. Maybe that's the most human thing of all, to stand at the intersection, to look in two directions at once, to carry the old while reaching for the new, to bury your dead with their feet to the east, while mounds of your ancestors rise behind you, watching, to ride out after something you've lost, even when you know you'll never catch it, and to wonder always who is telling the story and why. If you'd like to see some of the places and objects we've talked about today, I will link the places in the description. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the slow death of the old gods and the people who tried to keep them alive, and the system that replaced them, and the echoes that still reach us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast so you don't miss the next one. Following helps more people discover it, and it lets you know whenever a new episode comes out. And if you know someone who'd appreciate a different kind of history podcast, one that moves slowly and asks questions, please share it with them. Next time, we'll turn to something we've been building towards since the very first episodes, the women of the Viking Age, the ones who traveled, the ones who traded, who fought, and who ruled, the ones who have been waiting for us to see them. But that's next time. For now, imagine a man on a horse. He is crossing a stream. The stones are wet. The horse slips. The man leans forward, searching, desperate. Somewhere ahead of him, his grandson is being carried away by monks. Somewhere behind him, the world he knew is disappearing. He will not catch the child. He will not hold on to the old ways. He will slip like his horse and fall between the worlds. But he will keep searching. He will keep riding. He will look for something he cannot name, something he cannot find, something that was taken from him and can never be returned. Folke Filbyter is a legend. He is a man on a horse, frozen in bronze, searching forever. And somewhere in Sweden, in the soil, in the mounds, in the churches, in the runestones, the people who stood against the new God are still waiting, still hoping, still holding on to something the rest of us have forgotten. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they are just gone. Maybe the only thing left is the story, and the story is being told and retold and used and reused by whoever needs it. That's the thing about history. It's not just what happened. It's who gets to tell it. Until next time, keep looking beyond the Swedish postcard.